Why do you think that Christian people became synonymous with the concept of closedness versus openness?
What do you mean?
Mhm.
Like,
To things
yeah,
like that, that they
not
always that they're synonymous with taking the um, a more closed perspective to anything new or novel showing up, like an alien
Because of
or
the violence that had happened like right after Christianity's ascension as in the form of empire. All of these religious wars took place, and I would say not only Christians but also secular folk who don't subscribe to Christianity, had also developed a kind of like this is the role for religion in society, right? The role of religion in a society is more like a therapy kind of role, right? Where the priest or the pastor or whoever it is guides you as to which moral path that you're going to take, as opposed to having religion inform every aspect of our lives.
mhm.
So I mean, it's the very same reason that secularism has had ascended. Secularism had ascended as a reaction to the violence, religious violence that was occurring throughout the Middle Ages and the latter stage of the Middle Ages.
Mhm.
Mm.
Mhm.
So this is
Yeah,
like
that's
a differentiation, a reaction which enforces some differentiation in society because of that.
yeah. It's like a pendulum swift shift.
wait, you're
Like
saying
yeah,
society got scared of what religion was doing?
Yeah, I mean, religion became the scapegoat instead of man's tendency for man's proclivity towards violence. Human beings ideologically scapegoated religion,
mhm,
right? And they put religion in a certain box, like don't get out of this box.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's a lot like the what you talk about, like the pharmacon, when
mm,
the Greek philosophers, they pushed out the poets and the singers and stuff like that, because they said they were saying things that were too real, right? With their myths and their stories.
Yeah.
Those myths and stories, the, the way that they were telling them were had a stronger impact on the society than sort of like a philosophical, you know, discourse.
Right.
So the Greek philosophers, scapegoated the musicians and the poets and the prophets, right? The oracles and
yeah,
stuff like that, as they said they were dangerous for
mm,
society, because they tell too much of the truth. Yeah,
yeah, Socrates,
yeah,
and
Yeah.
and I think that's what secular society, did to religion.
yeah, like
To
people mistake the ascension of secularism and the kind of society we're living in. People mistake that as a kind of liberation from religion, but it's
Mhm,
really a form of religion because it's like an antidote as
mhm,
pharmacon towards religion, as you say.
mhm,
From looking at it from an anthropological point of view. So it's not really a liberation; it's a containing of
mhm.
undifferentiation.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
putting in this differentiation, new forms of differentiation, like
Mhm,
the separation of church and state and all of
mhm,
that. That's a differentiation, right?
mhm,
So it's like erecting borders
mhm,
between certain aspects of society so
mhm.
that there's no violent outbreak.
Right. Yeah. Mhm,
So they thought that religion was the domain of the hindbrain, the reptile, the kind of
Yeah,
dumb, violent impulse,
Mm.
which is true. I mean, it tends to stick to that level to this day.
mhm. Yeah. I mean,
That in terms of
of course
people's
we,
the way they treat it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess of course we see it from a different perspective. That religion actually is what has helped to contain violence, from spreading, you know, even more, right? But we don't see it that way because, as Surit was talking about, Christianity has sort of been the sort of, you know, uh, prime scapegoat, amongst the West. Right? It's been easy to do that because we can say, well, look back at history. Look at what the Christians did in this place, that place, you know, whatever, right? And I've said this, we've said this before. It's only Christianity that you can, like, you can't. The West dare not scapegoat any other religious, you know, any other
Yeah.
religion. It's just Christianity. So the question is why is that the case? You know.
Yeah, it's like Christianity is very vulnerable, right? So it's easy to scapegoat Christianity.
Mhm,
It's easy to scapegoat Christ more accurately, because Christianity doesn't allow itself to be used to scapegoat others. And
mhm,
if somebody does attempt to do that, then it's going to be very self-refuting, right? It's going
mhm.
to end up exposing yourself rather than expose anything else.
Yeah.
So for like the religious wars that took place in Europe, all of these Christian societies, uh, people did not want to look at the real factor, which was that it was these corrupted, politicians or rulers and priests or whatever. They were using
Mhm.
they were trying to use Christianity as like a bludgeoning tool to control the masses.
Mhm,
But what the real factor is, that the real thing that people forgot to observe is that how people are so easily, how people are so eager to control other people, and they would even do that through the name of Jesus. So
mhm,
that's like the real case that needs to be examined, but people didn't want to do that. They don't want to introspect, they don't want to self-examine. So
mhm,
they ended up scapegoating Christianity and thinking
mhm.
that, creating a separation of church and state is going to make the problem disappear. That's
Yeah.
that's not how it works. that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
that, that's one thing that Christianity will never allow you to do. They won't
Mhm,
allow you to, create other scapegoats so that you can, prolong the sacrificial way of society. That's
mhm,
not. It
But
may be possible
I
with other
think that
religions.
I think it's more complicated though. I think the human species has barely even begun to scratch the surface of comprehending what happened with the Christ event in history.
Well,
And
yeah, that's like
I think, like for example, Nietzsche says that man is like a woman in relationship to the gods. And I think that's an accurate thing. And I think Gerard helps you understand what he's talking about there, which is that, you know, it's something that, we, mankind in relationship to the concept of the transcendent, we want a God that's hard to get. And it's almost as if God, working with where we are, has allowed truncated, lower resolution versions of his story to percolate amongst the human population because it was the only means by which they would even give it a shot to try to engage in the revelatory experience of the cross and the community around it. Does that make sense? So
Mhm.
if you have a fool and you need to get that fool on board to save their life, and they say, well, you know, in order for me to follow you, I've got to be really sold on why I'm following you. And he says, well, you're going to have to figure that out. And that fool says, well, I think if I follow you, I'm going to get chocolate milkshakes and $1 million. If I really do everything you want me to do. And then he says, but that's not enough for me to follow you. There's got to be a lot of hard tasks. So what you want me to do is run around and do all kinds of laborious things and really challenging things. And I really need to do like a boot camp session to get to the point where I get my reward from you. And the guy that's trying to get you to follow him to save your life is like, okay, whatever, like, no, that's not true. But if that's how you need to take the first step, then I'll let you do that. And I think that's, unfortunately, this is terrifying. What I'm saying, and I don't care, because we have to free ourselves from the museum of Christianity. But this is terrifying for a lot of people's view of Christianity to come to even wrestle with the idea that mankind has created a lot of false conceptions about what happened on the cross and how God actually is, in order to find it attractive enough to follow it and obey it. And God and see, what I'm doing is I'm harmonizing. I'm harmonizing because I'm trying to tell you the truth of history. Whereas what I'm trying to say is, the leftist or progressive Christian theologians would tell you all of historic Christianity is pretty garbage. I'm not saying that, right? But I'm also not saying the other way, which is the reactionary Christian theologian approach, which is to say everything that was supposed to be known was directly downloaded sometime in the past. And all we're trying to do is get back to that period. So for the Reformation churches, it's trying to get back to some kind of golden moment in history in which the reformers, using reason, were able to ascertain the objective truth of the scriptural text, right? As best as possible. And that everything in history after that is trying to just get back to that singularity moment and stay there. Well, for the other church traditions that are older, they have their own nirvana moment too, when everything was divinely downloaded directly to human brains about what Jesus was about. And there was no human error that confused some of the ideas or had admixture in. And so they're all about trying to go back. But if you go back, that's pagan. And so all of those moves are fundamentally not Christian moves. To psychologically need to go back is to not embrace the reality of God, who is becoming. I'm not talking about process theology. I don't care. See, the left brain part of our brains always wants to freaking file away. This is what Shane tells me. I appreciate this. Shane says that it's hard to categorize you, which is hard to brand you, David. I appreciate that. But that's a left brain move that we've made, because in the Western institutions that we live, we have artificially propped up the left hemisphere of our brains. And the left hemisphere of our brains is good at grasping things and controlling and trying to impose things, ourself imposing onto the world. Whereas the right hemisphere is much more about allowing the mystery and the holistic experience of reality situate ourselves as one small part of it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of forms of holiness, in my opinion, and pietism, in my opinion, which are nothing but dressed up forms of egotistical self-obsession in the name of atoning for one's sins, and in the name of trying to get back to some perfect or some more perfect golden period in which everybody had got the direct download about what all this meant. But it wasn't done that way. When Jesus does the cross, when God does the cross, he does not give a step-by-step recipe as to what this means. Who would do that? What artist would do that? Only a left hemisphere insanely overemphasized, left hemisphere dominated society would think that God would do that.
Are you speaking in terms of like saying that there's a constraint on the gospel and Christianity's ability to have a sort of teleology that moves forward with like certain advancements, like you mean like in tech and science and
just everything? It doesn't have the right.
Christians should be sort of the at the forefront of that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. You know what I'm saying? But I also.
But we have to sorry to pass, but I don't want to interrupt what you're saying there, but we have to not just say, well, Christians should be involved in tech. That's kind of leaving it too surface. We got to go under the hood of the car, so to speak, of our society and our human culture and mind, to understand why we keep making the mistakes that we're making. What in the world is going on? Our society can't even form couples. Coupling has been destroyed. If you can't get coupling right, you don't have civilization and you don't have reality. If coupling can't be done without people losing their minds or having complete sterility, that is a sign that something is deeply wrong. Stop, rewind, and start afresh. Now, I'm not saying stop, rewind like the reactionary mind and find some golden period of history and cling to an ideological, ritual remembrance of it. I'm saying stop, rewind, and be willing to challenge the very fundamentals of your assumptions about what you're supposed to be doing on this earth. If we cannot have in our culture, cannot have sane coupling, you cannot have civilization. I think that we have to start there in terms of the picture of what does it mean to be human. If humans cannot find a healthy, because humans are mimetically designed, right? We're designed to find desire in other people's desires. All of that is manifested at the very foundation of civilization, which is the ability to have family formation. If you can't have family formation, your society is literally losing its mind into extinction. So you have to stop and say, okay, wait a second, with churches everywhere, still in America, yes, attendance is down, whatever. But with this kind of inheritance and this kind of, this kind of blanket Christian infection all around our society, if it's not taking, something needs to be really reevaluated. Yeah. See what I mean?
Well, I think on one hand, Christians, and not any particular tradition, but there is a level of preservation, right, as far as tradition and scripture, right? But then there's also what can we, what can be, done as far as progression. And you're talking from the level of a social and cultural aspect, as well as um, other forms of progress, right? And so, I mean, as far as relationships and stuff like that, I think this is one where we do have to recall the past, or recall the tradition of whatever, say, church we're in, or whatever denomination we follow. I think the teaching still stands, but about marriage and family and community and what that means, in a Christian context. And so that does have to, we do have to, I think, we do have to look back at that and say, okay, well, what was, what was, what is the church's teaching on marriage and familial relationships and stuff like that. I think that's important to preserve that, right?
Yeah.
But it's just as important to, what can the church actually do to make that the thing that people want to imitate, right? And so they don't see any, they don't see any positive, they don't see any positive outcomes in, having a covenant of marriage, right? They don't see anything out of that. It's like, what do I gain from that? I might gain, I might be married for a couple years, might have a kid, but then there's the whole possibility of, well, I get divorced, end up having to, pay child support, et cetera, et cetera. My money is messed up now and all that type of stuff. And I think that's what people fear. They don't, they're afraid to take those chances because the church tells you, okay, well, marriage is sacred. Family is important, right? These things are all, things that we need to preserve. But then society tells you, Why? Why should you try to preserve that when you're just going to get screwed over anyways?
Because that's what I'm saying is that, like, because Christianity, because the church is still, you know, look at these churches. Look at the head of the Orthodox Church. Literally, you know, what is his name? Bartholomew. He's literally a lackey from the Hillary Clinton Foundation. I mean, how pathetic is that? How pathetic is that? How pathetic is that? That a stooge who looks like Dumbledore from Harry Potter, who is a lackey for Clinton warmongering scum, is the head of this ancient institution.
Yeah.
But if you light a candle, okay, he'll make sure a donation gets to him and take care of the Clinton Foundation. I'm sorry, man. I'm saying this is something is fundamentally not right about the way in which we think about Christianity. Here's what I'm trying to say. The good news is things are going in the right direction in history because Jesus is moving things in the right direction, but it's in spite of our religious grasping of what's going on. That's what I'm trying to get at. In fact, that the religion of Christianity oftentimes is in the way of Christ doing his work even more beautifully and more amazing in society. Not that the church is to blame, but that if we are going to start there, which is, I'm in a town and I want to know, I've heard about this guy named Jesus and he seems to have a lot to do with why the world is the way it is. How can I learn about him? Well, you won't learn anything about that when you go to a church.
Yeah.
You won't understand. Let me explain to you what I'm trying to say. There's no anthropology. So when you go to a church, look at this comment I just saw. Charles Pillar from News from Science, science.org. Researchers plan to retract. Watch this. Researchers plan to retract landmark Alzheimer's paper. Major scandal. Authors of landmark study moved to retract, admitting that key images in the paper were doctored. Ben Landau Taylor, who is another, commenter on this, I guess he's a researcher, says in comment to this, there are about 50 million people with Alzheimer's disease. This fraud resulted in 16 years of misdirected research before it was discovered. Depending on how much that delays finding treatments, this fraud might cause more suffering than any ongoing war. In a just world, the trial of Sylvian Leslie, I guess this is one of the people who is a part of this fraud in this Alzheimer's paper, would be an event on par with the trial of Sam Bankman-Fried, but instead academics have closed ranks and nothing will happen to him. As critics of police often point out, their peers' behavior proves that it's not just a few bad apples. In other words, they're finding out, just like everything else you're going to find out, that the entire paradigm of like Alzheimer's cutting edge research has been built on fraud for the last 16 years while people were dying of this horrible disease. Now, when you go to any church in America, I guarantee you this Sunday, no one in the pulpit or any elder or any Sunday school teacher will talk about this and explain it from a Christian perspective. The only place you're going to hear about this in America from a Christian perspective is this humble, piddly little program that we're doing right now. That's a shame, right? That's a damn shame. Because if you knew anything about the Bible, if you knew anything about Jesus Christ, this should be a self-evident explanation as to why we got to this point. Because when we understand to take on the mind of Christ means to have the epistemological approach that Christ has, which means that you're going to have a hermeneutic of suspicion, which means you're not going to accept the prestige and aura of a magazine like Science because some aura and mist and all the trappings of sacred aura that we place into each other mimetically would not allow you to be so blind to accept some kind of fairy tale belief that if it's in Science magazine or Nature magazine, it must be unassailably true. Christians should be teaching their flocks every day to be skeptical of this, but they're afraid. They're afraid of the empire. They're afraid to go outside of their little Cartesian dualistic bubble. And that's the problem, because that's not Christianity. But here's the good news. Here's the good news. Christianity is still winning despite how anemic Christianity is actually properly, intentionally practiced in the religious sphere. Do you see what I'm trying to get at? I'm kind of making a paradox here, but it looks
Yeah,
a paradox, but it's not.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think the other variable here is that the church is overloaded by social, you know, this like trench warfare
Yes,
of
it
social
has been.
problems, you know.
It has been influenced too much by the culture surrounding it.
Yeah.
And that's pretty evident when David says we don't have a hermeneutic of suspicion. We sort of
Right.
like if there is a scientific magazine that's out there telling you there's a black hole somewhere out there and sucking up all of everything, then it's not that just the followers of Neil deGrasse Tyson will believe that, but even folks in the church, and
Amen.
there are lots
Amen.
of folks in the church that believe that as well.
Amen.
Now, like
or the belief in multiverse. Stupid.
right.
Every church. I'm sorry, but let's just call it out. I can say it. That these church pastors and priests, if you ask them, is there a multiverse? You know, if they take the reactionary Luddite move, they'll just say, no, I don't think so. But, you know, it's not no for the right reasons. It's like no out of like, I don't know, that's weird. But the natural instinct is to say, well, yeah, I mean, that's what the scientists say. Wrong. If you're a Christian, stop. Be patient. Assume that they could be a whitewashed tomb, just like the Pharisees who had the cultural cachet of Jesus's time. Assume not that they're diabolical people when I say whitewashed tomb. But what I mean is that there's nothing there. It's just mimetic prestige. And prestige is a vapor. It's nothing. But Christians have not been taught to deal with prestige truly. Right? Because you go to the most reverent churches and they're still fixated on making sure prestige is completely the main focus. Even though they're rightfully reacting to modernity, they're still holding on to this older form of prestige as their emphasis.
Yeah.
Did you stand and bow to me? I should not hear that as the main sentence of the people that imitate Christ. That should not be the first focus. If you imitate Christ, does someone stand for you or bow to you at the right time? That's a completely alien metrics of power that Christ cuts against in history. And what I'm trying to get at is we're running into this wild moment in history where we have to rapidly wake up to this. And thank God for the internet, which provides an opportunity for us to remember the truth of history in a way we've never done before, which will help us in some sense get out of ourselves and look objectively at what we're actually called to do in imitating Christ, and look at the progress we've made in spite of our fallen misconceptions about what Jesus is all about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll just say this, and hopefully you guys can say more. Shannon, you brought up a very valid thing about marriage, and just like, are we Christians really thinking from a Christ-like perspective when we talk about marriage? Most of the time, we don't. I mean, think about like how many churches closed down during the pandemic, right? We are totally enslaved to this world. We are totally enslaved to its systems, and it's not exactly like how you would hear your local pastor or local priest would say enslavement means. Like they would think about pornography and all of that, but it's much more deeper than that. So when you talked about marriage, it's like you talked about how Christians are thinking like, oh, what do I stand to benefit from this? What do I stand to get out of this? Like, it's so easy. It's so like coupling has been destroyed. It's so hard to, uh, date another person or whatever. But they're really looking at it from an egalitarian perspective. They're really borrowing the world's language and the establishment's language when they're even looking at certain things, a basic thing like marriage, right? Like even in that, like technology and science aside, like we can't even figure out what marriage looks like from the Christian perspective, right? So when men talk about, you all over the internet, you will see these things like a red pill manosphere and all of that. When men talk about, they talk about it from a very, grievance like they have a grievance, they have a complaint, but it's not supposed to be like that. I mean, it's very clear from the epistles that in your household, you're supposed to be like Christ. And the person who is your wife, she is supposed to look up to you like I look up to Christ, right? So when she's complaining and nagging, doing all of that, that's all of what we do all of the time when we have a problem with God, right?
Right.
And when we get
That's
we
right.
yeah we bash our heads against the wall. Why, God? Why? We do that. Like, it's literally like that. And that's like God is showing you that, because God is saying, fool, this is like how marriage looks like. Like
Yeah.
how I'm handling you, you handle the wife, right? God is not throwing you punishment. And not, you don't see God complaining about it in his own separate manosphere. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So like, this is supposed to how it's looked like. It's supposed to be sacrificial. It's supposed to
Yeah.
be protective. It's supposed
Yeah.
to be all of that. Like,
Yeah.
it's exactly a mirroring of, and many of like coming out of the marriage and to a broader society, many of the things in the world look like Christ's relation with his creation, right? Like politics or whatever, all of these things. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be merciful, compassionate, just, but not like a tyrant, not like a pagan god, right? Like the God who died on the cross.
Yeah, Shane, thanks for that, Stuart. Because it's one of those things where uh, the man said, "Well, God, why don't you help me?" And God is probably saying, "Well, because you didn't ask." You know what I'm saying? You're
Yeah.
not look. You're not. You're not following me. So why should I, dish out?
You eat seed oils, it destroys your thyroid, it destroys your wife's thyroid. You believe the lie of mimetic groupthink. When I tell you this sentence, which hormone is associated with aggression? What's the answer? You've been catechized, not by your church. What's the answer?
Testosterone.
Testosterone. That's a lie from hell. That's a lie from hell. Now go to your church, any church in America on Sunday, and ask any elder or priest or pastor, what hormone is associated with vicious, violent aggression? And they're going to tell you, if they want to, what will they say?
Testosterone.
Yeah,
When they don't have testosterone if they're saying that, right? But they're going to say that, right? Then you ask them, So what I'm trying to say is that's a lie from corrupted idiot. So it starts like fraud in the scientific community, but then it's built up by mimetic worship of the institutions of Science Magazine, Nature Magazine, Harvard, CBS, NBC. Those are all false gods, right? False idols. They're dead, dumb. There's empty tombs. There's nothing but dead bones inside. There's nothing there. There's no vitalism. There's no truth. There's no beauty. So CBS, ABC, New York Times, I'm just listing off the big iconic ones that generations for the while have been worshiping. CBS said, testosterone, aggression. Nature Magazine said, testosterone, aggression. My childhood, high school class, whatever. It's not true. Okay? What I'm trying to say is we have been poisoned by fraud and by worship, the mimetic worship, right? Let's say you have like a corrupt crook. Let's say you have a crooked car salesman and he's stealing and he's like sabotaging people's cars and he's selling them lemons, but somehow the town just loves that guy and they worship him like he is the greatest thing ever. He's the most amazing human being and the whole town's on board with it. And then your churches say the same thing. Yeah. You have so here's the metaphor for why the church is making the mistake. You have a town, there's a crooked used car salesman. He's sabotaging everybody's oil change. He's ruining people's cars. He's intentionally selling them lemons. He's enslaving him to horrible debt. And yet for some reason, because he's very good at marketing, or maybe he looks handsome or he's got money or whatever, there's so much mimetic esteem for that person in the community. Everybody worships the ground that guy walks on. They think he's the greatest thing. They put his name on everybody's school and their pool, and they put it on the garden. I mean, this guy is like the thing. And then the churches are largely on a board with it too. Whenever you hear the pastor, oh yeah, that guy, Billy Bob, is so wonderful. I mean, my God, he's just such an icon. So thankful to have servant leaders like him. And he's just a fraudster, right? And so that's what the church is doing, and the Christians is that they're going along with the lie. The first step is that he's defrauding. That's a sin. But it's the mimetic worship of the allure that's the real problem of our society, that the church gets swept up in. Where I say, well, maybe we need to rethink monocharged particles. By God, how could we? It's already been established. You're listening to mimetic prestige. If you were imitating Christ, you would be a little bit more suspicious of the crowd. You would be a little bit more suspicious, not of the crowd as an outside force, but as the crowd as it is in your own mind. That the crowd contaminates what you think is true and what resonates with you. And to have that kind of distance with yourself is what it means to die to self. You see what I'm trying to get at? Die to self is not this personal self-flagellation. Dying to self is part of distancing yourself from the false self that has been constructed by the crowd around you. By realizing, wait a second, I'm not have to be a wild, crazy, everything is a lie thing. That's what happens to people when they go dialectically from challenging everything in the establishment society says is true to, well, everything the opposite is true. Dinosaur, they lose their mind. So that we're not talking about that. We're talking about being an adult and walking the line, following Christ, and having that deep, deep hermeneutic of suspicion about your own expectations about the world, right? And not veering from, well, okay, the textbook's wrong, therefore crazy, stupid, nutcase theories are correct. No, that's just wasting your time with sensationalism, trying to create a new mere grievance, resentment-based conspiracy community. That's not what we need. What we need is sober analysis and having a suspicion of disbelief, of having a hermeneutic of suspicion allows us to be more able to step out of that suspension of disbelief for a moment and say, wait a second, I don't know if I'm buying this movie. This guy's a fraudster. I need to rethink cancer foundational research. I need to rethink heart disease. I need to rethink estrogen. I need to rethink thyroid. Why is it that they banned thyroid? You can't even sell thyroid. I went to a grocery store the other day and I said, just to see what they would say. I went up to the meat guy. He was stocking the meat. And I said, I was looking at some beef neck bones. And I thought, well, beef neck is near where thyroid is on a cow. And I said, you don't ever happen to have thyroid here, do you? And he said, oh, no, brother. That's not fit for human consumption. I'm not allowed to sell it. And I thought, isn't that weird? I'm in a society where a gland has been legally banned. You can't sell it. Why? We have an epidemic of low thyroid. Now, the immediate mind when I say that is, oh my God, I got a new Alex Jones conspiracy theory. No, we're not doing that. I'm sorry. We're thinking critically here. I can't take one more headline from Alex Jones saying, emergency alert, World War III happening this very moment. Please tune in and buy I can't do that anymore. That's just as much of a problem. I'm sorry. You're not doing that with me. I don't care if I have to stay poor, if that's what it takes. You just can't do that because that's an abomination of the truth too. Sorry, Shane, but that's what I just wanted to try to explain what I was saying.
Honestly, I've been quiet because I've been enjoying listening. But I guess really the only thing that I would say is the problem is that we've accepted the notion that we're supposed to live vicariously through other people, and that we're supposed to live vicariously through marketing campaigns. We're supposed to live vicariously through superhero movies. We're supposed to live vicariously through far off church leaders. You mentioned the patriarch and even the Pope. This whole notion that Orthodox Christianity or Catholicism are supposed to be personality cults around the Pope or around the patriarch. That's not the way it's supposed to be. If it's going to look like a personality cult, it ought to really be limited to the local bishop. And most of us don't really have any interaction with our local bishops,
Right.
But sometimes it's not even a personality cult. It's an ecclesiology cult.
Yeah. Yes.
You see what I mean? They worship the almost the bureaucratic structure of their polity in relationship to everybody else's. Isn't it so great that we do it this way? And so it's like worshiping the form and the structure. Isn't it great the way we have power distributed here and what they're able to, what our doctrine says that they can say here? It's this obsession with these kind of bureaucratic ways of looking at church polity, which is all people end up spending their time celebrating when they convert to these old religions, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, and it's great the way we do our bishop don't have this kind of power, and yours is allowed to do this, ours is not allowed to. Oh, that great, our fast is better than yours. I mean, this kind of obsession with the form, right? Obsessing with the form and not the spirit, right? It goes back to kind of that same battle that he was having with religious folks in his time, right?
Yeah.
They were obsessed with the form and not the spirit. He kept saying that over and over again. It's kind of
it's like you know, what I was talking to what's that brother's name? James Cortitas, and we talked about we you know, I titled it because we were talking about Christians not really believing in the gospels, believing in, you know, the teachings of their, you know, whatever, their various denominations or whatever. But the whole point was that, you know, we have we are leaving a period of time in which it was okay to just be a cafeteria Christian.
Yeah.
And you know, he was saying that, like, one of the things that Girard tried to get at is that there's going to come a time where we're no longer afforded that ability anymore, right? Like, you're not going to be able to just be prideful about being a cradle Catholic, right? Or you were born into the Church of God in Christ, right? Or you were born as a, I don't know, a Russian or a Greek in the various churches. You know what I mean? So that gives you some sort of nationalistic pride. You know, that we're not going to be allowed to do that anymore because the we're being confronted with a certain level of I guess sort of the world, you know, in all of its facets, that the, you know, people within the church and as Christians are going to either be hot or cold, right? Not lukewarm. And you know, admittedly, I believe that, right? I believe that that's true, and I believe it should be that way. But I also recognize that it's hard. It's difficult to, you know, uncover that, you know what I mean? Because to really take the gospel seriously, that takes effort and it means a lot, right? To have to do that. So you know, it seems easier to just, you know, are you a Christian? Yeah, born and raised, you know, in such and such church. I was, you know, I've been saved all my life. You know what I mean? It's this. I just want to, you know, tell people that I'm like this, but you know, I'm not really trying to act upon it. And that's, you know, that's something that I think the church is, you know, Christianity is just, we're faced with that now. Like, you don't, you know, dad
Well,
doesn't sit at home and watch football on Sundays anymore.
and I think that that's where we are seeing glimmers of hope is as David has said multiple times, this post World War II consensus thing where we're all our norms and values and everything are programmed for us via Hollywood or wherever the centralized entertainment industry is, and it's always a liminal space between that and whatever, and the country's intelligence agencies and everything, and it's this very nationalistic autocratic form of cultural control. That whole thing's cracking up, you know. I mean, it's breaking apart now. You know, they're trying to figure out how they can coalesce this new thing into another top down system that they can use to program the public, right? Which is inherently unchristian, you know. And so at least right now we're existing in a day and time where the internet has decentralized things, where you can be a small time person and distribute a show, distribute a podcast, you know, distribute articles and actually get read. You know, there's a lot of downsides to social media, but social media allows you to broadcast yourself and to have a voice in a way that you couldn't have had like 40 years ago, you know. And that's uniquely Christian. Now I think what we have to do is we have to seize the moment, and we have to rebuild our communities and we have to protect ourselves, because the thing is, this moment in time this opportunity, this moment in time may not last, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just speak a little bit here, and it seems like David has something to say.
Mhm.
Christians are like, we're like the we're in a theater, right? And we're eating a popcorn and we're watching the movie, the train wreck and everything that's going on, and we're laughing, ha ha ha, like eating popcorn and just enjoying ourselves. That's us Christians, right? Modern day Christians. But at one point of the movie, everybody notices that this jerk is laughing a lot, and everybody turns to that guy eating the popcorn. Some are looking at him like, that why is this guy laughing all the time? Is he going to do something or not? Some are looking at him angrily. But all of them
So
are
like
looking at him
everybody's laughing
because
at the regular funny scenes, and then he just keeps laughing at random scenes that are not funny. Oh, that's I like that. That's funny.
And everybody's looking at him because well, you've been laughing long enough. Are you going to do something, or are you going to just be there and isolate yourself and just have a nice time in your little box, while you're eating popcorn and all of that? So like what Shane and Shannon had said, like it's time for us to do something, and it's time for us to build. We've done repenting a lot long enough. Like we've been repenting for like how many years? 2000 years. Like we've literally been isolated ourselves in islands and far away at the places where even animals are not aware of. Like that exists. Wow, I didn't know that. So like we've been isolating ourselves, and we've bought into the lie that we need to be separated from the secular world, and we've isolated ourselves, and we've been enjoying ourselves for far too long. But now it's the time to is to get into the zeitgeist of the culture and start working.
Yeah, like when you see that movie Never Ending Story. Have you ever seen that movie Never Ending Story? See how happy he got excited. Now, Shane, did you hear that great song you guys sang on Sunday, the second song?
Which one?
How come you didn't jump up and smile when I said Never Ending Story? When I said Never Ending Story, what you're talking about. Did you go to church on Sunday?
What?
Did you go? Did you hear a song on the church service recently? How come you're not smiling with joy? That's what I'm saying. When I said Never Ending Story, he went, "Oh yes, I love it." When I said, "Hey, did you hear that song you guys heard on church Sunday?" He's like, now here's my point. Why do we believe that Christianity is somewhere away from that joy that you felt as a child watching Never Ending Story? That's what I want you to think about. See, in my mind, because I go through everything else everybody feels, despair and all these things. But when my mind is right and my heart is right, living in the Christian world that I believe is as exhilarating as watching Never Ending Story for the first time as a child. And what I'm saying is, if you're doing worship, if your view of worship or any of the other things that you discipline yourself to do, if it's not sparking, I'm not saying it has to be easy. We're not saying easy. But if it doesn't spark wonder and joy and delight, like all those great movies or those experiences you had as a child, then maybe there's something that we're doing wrong. If you feel like it's this drab rejection of the joy you felt when you watched Never Ending Story, because Never Ending Story, for whatever joy it gave you as a child, was borrowing from the reality of Christ's story and history. You get it? So if your experience of Christ's story is so drab and so awful and austere that you have to take a break from your religion every now and watch Never Ending Story and go, oh, well, there's something wrong with where you've approached the point of Christ. Because Christ is the originator of that experience that Never Ending Story is borrowing from. You get what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so what I'm trying to say is I'm not trying to attack people's worship style or anything like that. I'm saying every day I wake up and I look at the world and reality unfolding and I say, my God, this is the most exciting. I feel like I'm in a movie. I feel like I get to have this really elastic part that can be extremely insignificant or extremely significant. It doesn't matter. What matters is you're being a part of this glorious story. And everybody's little lives and their little secret stories and their little afflictions and traumas are all part of this tapestry that God's weaving. But there is, you know, when you listen to the song Nesum Dorma, as performed by Pavarotti, one of the three tenors, you hear that song and there's an ecstasy, right? And we're told in our ideological approach to religion somehow that is not really the point of life. That is not the point of what God has us here. That ecstatic feeling you feel is kind of a little dirty. What you're engaging in the world and its pleasures right now. You're engaging in the passions, the delights. You need to get back to the austere, drab, fear mechanism feeling of religion. And I'm telling you that's wrong.
Yeah.
I'm telling you that's wrong, okay?
Well, I mean, just think about it this way. I think you mentioned Nesum Dorma, right? Now, preferably, I prefer the one sung, the rendition by Aretha Franklin, but that's just my opinion. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make is that music was born in a Christian context. It was born, you know, in a space and time where everyone was Christian, and you know, we can make the assumption they were devoutly Christian. It's just somehow, I think, especially in an American context, I think we tend to do that more than other cultures. You know, I think
do what?
try to sort of separate, you know, the beauty from the religious, you know, or the sacred.
Yeah.
Right.
But even those Italian boys to this day, they probably think when I'm want to be a good boy, I go to church. Then when I want to go to opera and have good wine and enjoy the life, I go to the world. And then I come back and I be a good boy and I go to the church.
But the question you have to ask yourself is how did that happen? And why did that happen? Right. And I, you know, I'm not putting the blame on anybody. I'm not saying any particular group is to blame, but I do think that sort of the idea of you know, sort of being holier than thou or whatever sort of came out of a Puritan culture, you know, that was very prevalent in America, you know, particularly along the Eastern Coast, you know, and with various Protestant groups.
But it's how
I'm not blaming them for
that's just one version of it.
Yeah, because
the Puritans ended up becoming Unitarians and then the atheists. So they don't really exist much anymore.
Yeah, I mean, my point wasn't to direct it at them. I'm just saying that I do think that there's a stream in which that flow from, right? And so the idea of anything that could be you know, used for the glory of God outside of the church is sort of considered to be, you know, not okay. And in return, even the more orthodox churches have applied that same method. You know what I mean? When it probably didn't used to be that way.
But it's primarily like there are two things that, like in the West, there's an approach which is based upon categorization, right? Separation and all of that. But if you look to the East, and when I say East, I mean Asia, Southeast Asia, these traditions, they have a much more holistic approach to things. So like even things like, you know, if you order something at a restaurant in the West, all the things will be separated, right? The rice is separate, the curry is separate, and all of that, the meat is separate and all of that. But if you order something in an Indian restaurant, all of the things are mismatched, you know, together. Like they're mixed, all of that, like the curry and everything, the chicken, the beef, whatever. It's all together. So even in small things like that, like all of things are intertwining with one another, right? And like all of these philosophies, these Eastern philosophies and all of that, they all have religion and philosophy and everything intertwining with each other. They're not separated from one another. Like
they're rapidly trying to do what the West did, and that's to their own detriment.
Yes.
But you know, in the same, I've used that metaphor for food for like atoms. You know, I've always explained why, because I was so fascinated with Dr. Yu's going to be doing some fantastic project coming out soon for everybody. But I was so fascinated through the years of working with Dr. Yu on our program and off camera and some of the research we've been doing at the fundamental proposition that he says where all physics starts to really go off the rails. A lot of it is in the assumption that there is a monocharged particle, that there's two charges, positive and negative. Therefore, there must be two separate particles. And I always ask, well, how did they like demonstrate that? They really never had any real solid evidence for that. It was just an assumption they made because they're Western and they have left hemisphere dominated thinking, and their institutions elevate left hemisphere dominated thinking, which separates the broccoli from the peas and the fried chicken on the plate, so to speak. Whereas in the East, if the East and it's a little bit more right hemisphere orientation had been at the power seat of history at that time, perhaps physics would have never assumed such a fundamental mistake that then leads to all these insane things where we have all these different fundamental forces, gravity, separate and distinct from electromagnetism, separate and distinct from strong force, from weak force. There's matter, and then there's antimatter. There's, you know what I mean? Like all these just so assumptions are often being derived from this left hemisphere assumption that, well, it starts with there's a positive and negative, therefore there must be two separate particles. One's positive, one's negative. But it violates its own law, because if you separate an electron and you cut it in half, you've got what? If you could divide an electron, you have two negative particles. How can two negative particles form when they're going to be repelling, you know, opposites, same charge repels, opposite charge attracts. So the idea of an electron even existing in the first place doesn't make any sense from their own standard of the law of not being able to violate that principle. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is that where does that come from? Left hemisphere dominated thinking. And so what I'm trying to get at is that we need, I've said this before, we need an anthropological focus on Christianity. That means teaching people to have the mind of Christ in a earthly sense, not just a heavenly sense. The mind of Christ is used as this ethereal escape, Gnostic delight, escaping out of the troubles of our time and just reflecting in the ethereal world to come. And maybe there's a place for that in part of your day. But there's another part of the day that you need to use the mind of Christ to say, I'm not putting that garbage product in my child's skin. Are you kidding me? I just saw a report that the flu, you know, product, I'm trying not to use the words that the little left brain robots are going to go, but the flu product is dropping in its use, that people are dropping, giving that to their kids. It's starting to fall. But still the number is like 65%. And I was like, are you kidding me? 65% of children in America are still getting that garbage thing? You know, the flu.
Ridiculous.
Like, what do you need that for? What?
And many of them are
When the church doesn't talk about that. The church talks about salvation. Salvation of what? Salvation of what? The earth, the body, all of it is saved. It's God's. We're not
many
Gnostics.
of them are from the church.
We
That's
are
the
not
thing.
Gnostics. We're not concerned with this detached soul, so that we don't even use thinking and critical thinking to tell the truth about our body, so that we line up like cattle to these stupid fraudsters that should have never been given the kind of prestige and power that they've enjoyed for decades.
But where does all that go back to, right? It's this belief that, you know, this body is not forever. You know, one day I'll fly away.
But
right?
that don't. It's
Just-
not the Protestants that did this.
I'm just using the song. I'm just using the song. I didn't say it was still. I'm just using the song. Okay, what other song?
They've been doing that. They've been doing that Gnostic move because they misremembered some of the important messages of the early martyrs, where they said they filleted the guy alive, then they burned him alive, then they electrocuted him, then they ran oxen over his body, and he still didn't care. And then they just terrorized, took his liver out, he still praised God, took his kidney out, he's still praising God, took his everything out, he's still praising God, skinned his skin off, he's still praising God. And so they do that, and I'm saying if that happened to a martyr God be praised that he had the strength or she had the strength. But the wrong message is learned from that. The wrong lesson has been taken through the church and said, well, therefore, let the body hit the floor and let your soul be your only thing. And it's like, no, we recoil with anger that happened to the body, because the body is a representation of earth, which was meant to be God's home. And the Holy Spirit indwells in every body in the world as his tabernacle, as his temple. And so we should recoil at those tortures, not say, well, it's like a coping mechanism. The trauma of the torture of the early church gets misremembered as a kind of detachment from the body. So don't blame it on the I'll fly away. That's just 2,000 years distillation and a bar. That's a bar tune. I'll fly away. That's a distillation of 2,000 years of trauma.
I think David just likes that song so much he got a little offended.
Don't you kind of think that the core problem here, though, is that that if we were to analyze what the beating heart of the culture is, the beating heart of the culture is not the church, right? Like, it should be encountering God at the altar every Sunday. That that should be where everything else emanates. That entertainment will be different forms of imitating the chants, and the songs sung at church. That's essentially what entertainment will be. It'll secular entertainment ought to be an imitation of those things, but unfortunately, especially in America, what is the beating heart of our culture? You could say it's Washington, D.C. You go and look at the layout, the geographic layout of most American cities. The center of the city is usually like the city hall, or it's a courthouse or something. And those things are not altars. They are not places where you go to encounter God in the real presence, right? Like, those things are those things are mere reflection, or those things should be reflections of what's happening at the altar, right? And the thing is, that's because we've fallen away from that in the West. I think we can only expect for this culture to just devolve into debauchery.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening, right?
Yeah.
So, and unfortunately, the leaders of the church are not fighting back against that, and the leaders of the church are unfortunately Christians are not pushing back and saying, no, the center of my life is the altar at the church where I encounter God.
Well, the center of our life is that we have been given the Holy Spirit to dwell in us, to do good things, to do wonderful things. And what happens is people are so scared of all the false gods falling apart all around them that they're moving to religion in a direction of fear. And that is not the direction that finds God. God says, fear not. Now, God does want us, there is a fear for God, right? But what I'm saying is that doesn't look like the fear I'm talking about. People are moving to religion in a defensive posture. And my point is that the best defense is offense. And so my approach is an offensive Christianity, in the sense of we need to remind the world as to what is the inheritance from Christ and what is the down payment of what's to come. So the Christian is the leader who can tell the truth. Shane says that a man is powerful when he is able to predict the future and then it comes to pass. And so that is the church's power. And the church should be able to tell people through the use of Christian discernment about what's to come in world events, what's to come in technological discoveries, what's to come in terms of false gods that will be shattered. And you can do that if you take on the mind of Christ. I can tell you that we're going to learn a lot more than just Alzheimer's research is foundationally fraud. We're going to find out that cancer, diabetes, psoriasis, all of those diseases, mental illnesses, so many different things that we have it's going to be blowing people's minds. And the way you get them to not blow their minds and go crazy is to go ahead and tell them and then give them the steps how to heal and stay through this process and keep their mind to go through the turmoil and have joy. Because when you elevate your thyroid, you're going to have more joy. You're going to have more euphoria, and it's okay to have euphoria. Euphoria is healthy. God wants us to feel that, not all the time, 24/7, but the euphoria doesn't mean ecstasy all the time. It means a state of equanimity and peace, right? And actually having a strong, healthy testosterone is going to give you a sense of peace. It's not going to give you a rabid dog vibe. It's actually too much estrogen and cortisol that makes you rabid and grumpy and creepy and too horny, and all those things come from those things, not actually from healthy testosterone. We've been systematically lied to by most of it is just social worship of other institutions. Well, this is where I go to learn about body health, and this is where I learn about mental health. This is where I learn about that. No. Be very skeptical that those are Pharisees. Those are whitewashed tombs filled with nothing but destruction, because they don't orient themselves on objective truth and love. If we orient ourselves towards objective truth and love, our medicine will be healing and you'll be fixed. People will be healing their relationships. Rhoda Barnes wrote a book in the 1950s that low thyroid is the most unknown disease plaguing America. That was in the 50s or 60s. It might be wrong on the date, but he was finding that his couples were getting divorced because they had thyroids that were low. And when he got their thyroids fixed, they would just naturally find that the problems that were annoying the hell out of each other for decades just were like laughed off. See, now when you have a Christianity that's so heavenly minded, it's no earthly good, then you don't have a Christianity, because a Christianity that's actually functioning would give you the discernment to know that that's the problem. Stop attacking each other. Realize your thyroid's down. Realize you got ghrelin. Realize you've got hormones going on, creating signals. And if you're not intelligent enough to realize that that's what's driving your feelings of irritation or paranoia, not the other person, then you're just missing out on opportunities to be able to be healed and to spread that joy to other people. So I just think that that's what the world is hungry for. They're hungry for joy. Right now, Trump just got convicted of the 34 felonies. Steve Bannon's going to go to prison for 6 months. Politics goes nowhere but the dungeon. And politics will not give you any real lasting answers. The only value of politics is the symbolic truth, the symbolism. Symbolism is important. And that really, it does make politics important in that way, because symbols are so important. But, right now, the public is starting to viscerally shiver at the convictions of Donald Trump, because they're starting to realize this is a symbol of a white, rich man. And this new multicultural coalition society they're trying to create has been trying to catechize people for decades, including white people, that a rich old white man is the very heart and soul of privilege and corruption and evil in society. And now they're realizing, wait, he can get the book thrown at him too. He can get a crooked trial too. The penultimate symbol of rich, decadent, racist, allegedly white old man can get rigged too. Wait a second. That's an apocalyptic unveiling that maybe we're not so different after all. Maybe that we're all possibly being screwed by this corrupt system that we've idolized. And that maybe, just maybe, one of the reasons why people are starting to get fearful and scared about what's happening with Trump is that it's a visceral reality waking up to the fact that the institutions that we put in place to hold back the mob are starting to be breached by the mob spirit. And that scares people, because the wrath of the gods that we remember from our ancestors is actually the crowd and its violence and its wrath. And that's what we're scared of. If the justice system is now going to be weaponized to the point that even a president and a billionaire and all this can be indicted on all these shammed up charges, and can be bankrupted by the right trial and the civil lies that they're doing in the lawsuits, what else can happen to everybody else? That means there is no institutional justice. There is no restrainer of the mob spirit. Do you get what I mean? I think that's why a lot of leftists are joining Trump now. They said, my God, the mob spirit's going to envelop this whole country.
Some people might say that's the Catechon being removed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They probably might allude to that. They say, well, this is the Catechon being removed. And now, we just have an outpour of both negative and positive mimesis. Anything can, the bulwark can come through, and you don't know if that's a positive or a negative thing, you know. But yeah, I mean that's what I
Yeah,
hear,
I
you know.
think I think
Yeah.
Francis Fukuyama was right when he said like we have come to the end of history, because that's the end of history from a perspective of a history without a god, a history without synthetic, synthesis of human activity and godly activity, divine activity. So we have we are seeing these things that David, you have mentioned, that the conviction of a former president, and World War III imminent and all of that. We are seeing these things because that's really where the experiment of without God, a society without God, or without even like the church's active participation, uh, aside from the prayer, private prayer, and all of that part, like the lack of churches participation, that's where it has gotten us. So now, like, we need to, like, we literally have to rely on a transcendent to arrive past this stagnation, go past this stagnation in history, go past this, quote unquote end of history. And I think what David has you know proposed here, that we get, like, we not only, it's not about just Christians getting into science, Christians getting into engineering and all of that, but it's rather that Christians driving the very force, driving the very, paradigms, changing them as they see fit. That sort of thing is very much required if we are to, survive in history.
Well, I really appreciate you guys, and I know you guys had to run, right? And any last thoughts, Shane? Or I think you didn't get to speak here yet.
No, I'm no, I really enjoyed I've really enjoyed listening. I think this is a great conversation.
Just think about it for a second, guys. If you got people who are ill-equipped, if they've got a Cartesian model of it's all spirit, or the matter world is mostly for the world to deal with, and it's all kind of whatever. What happens when you got two people at war with one another, when they've got serotonin issues, they've got estrogen issues, they've got cortisol issues, and all your priest or pastor does is just say, keep praying. Well, okay, but prayer has an answer.
Yeah.
Worship God with your body, soul, and mind. If you got, if you take a badger and you F with his serotonin and estrogen and you put him in a cave, it's going to attack. It doesn't matter what it prays. That badger can get on its little paws all day long and say, dear God, when it sees that other badger in that cave and it's got his serotonin effed, he's going to go tear his ass up. What priest is it good for at that point? What priest is that good for? That's not a priest, that's Christ. A priest that follows Christ as Lord. What can I do? Jesus said, we will all worship in spirit and truth on this planet Earth. Romans, Paul says that creation is groaning and waiting for the sons of God to be revealed, to set it free from its captivity to decay. And that includes your hormones being balanced in a wacky way, to the point where badgers are clawing at each other's death. And we're over there saying, look, we need this just to be more holy. That badger will calm down. Let's all pray for that badger right now. Everybody, let's pray for that badger. That badger's like, please feed me proper food. Stop giving me soybean oil. I'm going to hit this other badger in the face so hard if you keep giving me this antidote called soybean oil in my head. It's messing with my gut. And we're like, oh, let's pray harder. He's angry. He's got the passions. Oh, God. Oh, the badger's so enraged. Must be demons. Give him food. He needs real food. And his wife, too. Let him heal. And when he's healed, you're going to watch that badger licking and having a good time and mating with his wife. And the badger pups are going to be beautiful. But we're so heavenly minded, we're no earthly good, which is no Christianity at all.
We got new nature theology, bro. See, I told you about the animals. What did I say, David?
That's right.
You said I said that. Now you taking it on, brother. Take it on.
Shannon said this is one of the greatest quotes that changed my life. Shannon told me one day, he said that animals are waiting for us to learn how to treat each other right and learn how to get our marriages better. before they fix their own. I said, dear God, you got to be kidding me. You're saying the animals are waiting for us. I'm like, so when I'm at a safari, the lion's checking me out to see how nice I am to the other guy in the little Jeep. He's like, dang, look at how that guy grabbed his apple. And David was like, go ahead. They want another one. And the lion's like, dang, man. In some kind of magnetic field. I'm not saying consciously, but you're like saying like on some kind of magnetic field, that lion's like, maybe I need to like not kill that other guy's cub next.
I don't know if that was a magnetic field or if that was gin and soda talking, bro. I got, we'll figure it out later though.
The result is that matters. Yeah.
All right, guys, take care.
All right, man.
You too, David.